Shavua Tov, a good vach. Tonight's story I wish to share with you, it's connected to the Parsha, where we read the second paragraph of the Shema. It's obviously super important because it's not only part of the tefillin, it's part of every mezuzah we have. And the mitzvah, one of the mitzvahs is that to educate your children. And it's amazing the impact that a loving teaching has on a child. That's the point of my story. The Rebbe's shliach to Los Angeles, Rabbi Kunyan, to California. Many years ago, there was a program in California designed in the summertime for very bright, talented Jewish high school seniors, and to prepare them for a leadership role that they was hoped they would one day assume in the Jewish community. And therefore, many presenters and lecturers from LA were brought to this retreat for these high school students. Rabbi Kunyan wasn't invited, perhaps on purpose, but he received word from the Rebbe's office that he should make an effort to get invited. So he made a few phone calls, pulled some strings, and voila, he was invited and given the opportunity to do two things: to make a presentation and to teach a Hasidic song at the supper meal. At one meal of this retreat, he would come and sing a Hasidic song. So a number of years go by, and it's hopefully a learning, enjoyable experience. And in 1 year, he had the most horrible group of students that he'd ever had in his life. They were, disrespectful for sure, and they made his life miserable. They challenged him, they questioned him, they laughed at him, they mocked him. In particular, there was one student, his name was Steve. I think his name was Lebovich, something like that. And he just was the pits. He harassed the rabbi, couldn't get one word out, couldn't get one thought out. And finally, he gratefully concluded his presentation and he left the hall. And he really was not in a good place. He really felt this was a horrible experience, being laughed at, mocked, all that kind of stuff. Anyways, came time for supper. The rabbi was thinking, should I go, shouldn't I go? With this group of kids, what will they do when I sing a Hasidic song? They'll laugh me out of town. Who knows what they'll do? But he decided he has to go. So he shows up at the meal and he teaches them a song. And the song he chose is known as Kol Bayar, a voice in the forest. And it describes a conversation between our Father in heaven. God is calling out, where are my children? He's looking for his children. And the children are responding and they're asking, where is God? And this conversation, each one is looking for the other, waiting for the other to make the first move. And we really think God should just give up, give in, and make the first move and bring Mashiach. But anyways, this is the song he sings. Kol bayar anochi shomeya. And he sang this whole niggin, and right when he started, like just maybe a minute into the song, this Steve, this kid who had been just such a troublemaker, storms out of the cafeteria. And I think the rabbi felt a little bit goodbye and good riddance. At least you're not going to give me more trouble. Anyways, he finishes teaching the song and he leaves. He walks out into the hall or the lobby, and he sees Steve is sitting and he's crying. So he walks over to him and he sits with him, and eventually Steve tells him this story. He says, I grew up, my parents are not religious, that's the kind of home I grew up. Perhaps we went on the high holidays to temple. But my grandfather was a religious Jew. In fact, he was a mohel and a shochet, and he was very religious. He lived somewhere in the middle of America, like Nebraska. When my grandmother died, he was already an older man. It was hard to live alone. He moved into our house. Since we didn't have a kosher home, a little section of the kitchen was dedicated for him, and he made it work. Well, I was a kid of 7, 8 years old. I was the only child in the house. My parents were busy. I had many opportunities to bond with my grandfather, with my Zayda, and he loved me, and we would fabring together, we would talk. He taught me the Shema. And one day, Regular school day, I'm heading off to school. My mom is downstairs in the car waiting for me to come. And my grandfather said, come ahead, boyche, come here, child. And I walked over to him and he gave me a big hug and sat me down on his lap and he says, I want to teach you a niggin. And I said, Zayd, I got to go to school. Mom's waiting, He said, I must teach you a niggin. And he held on to me and he started teaching. He sang me a song. And I really was not so interested. I wanted to get out. I loved being in his arms. And the song finished. I ran downstairs. My mother was upset. I ran into the car and came to school. At the end of the day, I came home. My grandfather had a heart attack and passed away. So our last conversation, our last interchange, the last time he held me in his arms was when he sang me this song. Now I wanted to know that song. I wanted to remember that song. But of course, my father had no clue. My mother had no clue. And I could not remember the song. Not the words, not the tune, not the context. And I've been looking for that song for 10 years. Many a rabbi have stopped and asked, and no one knew it. And when you began to sing that song, that is the song that he sang to me. And all of a sudden, I was just overwhelmed with memories of my grandfather holding me, hugging me, saying Shema with me. And that's why I'm here. Well, to make a long story short, Steve is a happily married father, husband, religious guy living out in California. So that song, not so much, in my opinion, not the song of Rabbi Kunyan, the song of the Zayda who hugged his grandchild and taught him something, that was etched in his heart and in his memory, and that's the value of teaching our children. May Hashem give us the ability to do it right. Have a great week.